Hello, everyone. Hello, Mr. Isaac.
Hi.
How do you feel about that?
Mr. Isaac is
Pretty
what happens
fancy.
when I get in trouble and go to the principal.
If you know Mike Isaac at all, I want you to take a moment and appreciate the suit. You guys should be very flattered.
This is the suit they'll bury me in.
Maybe tonight. Just kidding. It's going to be great. My name is Molly Wood. I am the host of the Marketplace Tech radio show, and I am very excited to be on stage alongside my friend Mike Isaac. Thanks so much for asking me to do this.
Thank you.
As a tech reporter for the New York Times, Mike has broken countless stories on the good and increasingly the bad sides of Silicon Valley. He is now the author of the fantastic new book, Super Pumped, The Battle for Uber, which I have to say I saw on a list of 29 memes about Silicon Valley.
Memes?
Yep.
Already?
Your book has already been memed.
That's better than a
Yep.
bestseller list.
It's amazing. It chronicles the rise and fall of course, one of tech's biggest startups and most fascinating stories, and its controversial founder and former CEO, Travis Kalanick, with impressive detail, excruciating detail, incredible detail. Mike builds the story of this company that I think we all know so much about, hell-bent on growth and world domination in the winner-take-all of Silicon Valley. So we're going to talk about Super Pumped, Uber, Travis, and much more for the next hours. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Isaac.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the book.
Thanks.
So, hey, how'd you get here tonight?
Oh, God. I
As
did
was
take
coming
an Uber here.
Did you take an Uber here?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're still using it.
Yeah, there was a period I wasn't using it, probably for about 2 years. But it wasn't really out of a moral stance or anything, you know. I cover Facebook too, and I still use Facebook, and I cover Instagram and use these. It was more because two of my sources specifically told me to delete it from my phone because they were worried about getting tracked, or like me being tracked when I would go to meet them. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, so it was more out of like precaution.
But you didn't. That wasn't a concern during the book. Now we're like into a whole other story I was not expecting. Tell me more.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. No, I mean, it definitely, these apps are, mass surveillance mechanisms essentially, and if the company, some of the people I talked to are more paranoid, but if the company or someone at the company wanted to, they could have seen where either of us or any of us are at any time. So yeah. I had to delete it. But not anymore.
What if that was not it? And actually, having read the book, it's kind of not. If you had to pick a thing that surprised you the most, like a thing you did not know when you started writing this book, what do you think it would be?
I think there was a lot more violence than I was like prepared for.
Wait, good chuckles, guys.
Yeah. Nervous laughter. No, there was. Uber is not like a web traditional internet company where you just sort of like hack something together and get it going, or for Facebook or Twitter or whatever. Those just kind of got up and running pretty quickly. Like this is actually introducing stuff into the physical world, right? It's like people call using their phone. They call a car and it comes there, and there's all sorts of dynamics that change once you introduce that into an economy. So in Brazil, there's this one part in the book where Uber enters into Brazil at probably one of the worst times in the country's economy. They're in the middle of this recession. Unemployment is skyrocketing, and they introduce Uber into the country, and it's largely cash-based. And so all the drivers that start driving for Uber essentially become these like rolling ATMs that burglars start, ending up essentially like beating up the drivers, or in some cases murdering the drivers and taking all their money. And so like it didn't make as many headlines in the United States. It was there were other types of really messed up things. I'm starting really serious. I'm sorry.
I'll dial us back.
But it feels very different than the first wave of web companies, at least, just because you're in the real world. It's meat space,
Which is actually, it's amazing. In some ways, we're starting at the end there a little bit, in the sense that you got to figure that was, among many things that this company may have been naive about, and we'll get to actual malice later.
Yeah.
One may have been that, right? That it was sort of like, we'll just we'll just take this approach. We'll just copy and paste this thing all over America with, these city managers who had all of this autonomy and all of this power. And then we'll do the same thing in different countries. And what could go wrong?
Yep. No, I mean, I think that is a tried and true playbook out here too, probably, and again, you can go back to, I use Facebook as a reference point a lot, but, you go back to this idea of we're going to hack something together and we're going to get out there really quickly. And when you're a small company, you kind of have to move very quickly or else you might run out of funding or people don't care about what you're doing or whatever. So it's I think like a lot of the time, there might be some like founders in the audience, but a lot of the time it's just sort of like, get it out there fast and then we'll think about how the consequences afterwards, But I think there was, just in Uber's case, there were a lot more unintended consequences and they were bigger than, like accidentally leaking your photos or something. It was serious.
So let's start a little closer to the beginning.
Yeah.
Go back a little closer to the beginning. There's kind of a couple aspects to the growth of this company. And one is, of course, the rule breaking.
Yeah.
And that part of the book, you can't help, even knowing how it's going to end, you can't help but have a tiny bit of admiration.
Yeah, totally.
For the chutzpah, for the idea that like this is a corrupt system and these are not rules that I have to follow.
Yeah.
So talk about how that starts and then when it starts to go astray.
I think the thing that was funny to me is that it took a lot to turn cab drivers into the hero, just because like most people just didn't like the experience of riding in a cab, right?
Yeah.
If you go to get in a cab in New York, I would, when I was a little kid and first got into a cab in New York, like I was just scared I was straight up gonna die because it was like a very crazy experience and they weren't always, kept very well. And so to turn the cabbies into the hero of the story took some real, they made a lot of people mad in the beginning. But I think the thing I wanted to do in this book that I don't think headlines probably in 2017 and the past few years got at was turn, or at least show the why Uber had this sort of aggressive stance and why Travis Kalanick, the CEO, was just sort of as hard charging as possible. And a lot of that was just because the barriers to entry in this whole arena were so high, and the incumbents, the taxi operators and the livery services had been there forever, right? And the laws that were set up by different governments, different cities around the world were there to essentially serve the people who had been operating there for a very long time. So if you're Uber, if you're a disruptor, if you're a company that's like, look, we have a different way of doing this, we have a better way of doing this, we want to use your phone to actually call these cars. There's a lot of sort of Byzantine rules that don't necessarily make sense, and we can fix it. The incumbents are not going to be happy to do it, or at least happy to just usher you in the spirit of competition. They're going to try to keep you out. So I think from the very beginning, Kalanick and others were just like, all right, we have to dive in and start fighting.
And actually, one tidbit that people may not realize too is that I think everybody knows that Uber started as really a high-end service,
Yep.
and that it was Lyft who first introduced the idea of using your own car, and that Uber then, after failing to sort of use regulation to get Lyft shut down, said, "All right, I guess we're going to break all these same laws too."
Yeah, my favorite thing about Uber is how they managed to take credit for a lot of things they never did. Uber didn't invent peer-to-peer or like the ride sharing where like anyone can sort of get their thing, use their car to drive around. They were actually a black car service first. They tried to prohibit that from happening, but Lyft sort of got that off the ground. Uber Pool or Lyft Line, whatever the carpooling option they use these days, Lyft was working on that for a very long time, and then Uber sort of found out about it and ripped them off and sort of announced it before Lyft could get out there. So it's funny, but I think
great artists steal.
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, it doesn't matter who does it first; it matters who does it best, right? And who does it the biggest. And like, I will say that Uber has been good at execution on some of these things, and has popularized stuff, even if they weren't the first to do it.
So what do you think? I mean, there's a version of this story where Uber comes out as Ray Kroc from McDonald's, who sort of weaseled the McDonald's empire out from under the original McDonald's empire, but wasn't necessarily villainized for it. Or they come out like Southwest Airlines, like a total disruptor that nobody wanted around. What do you think is the point at which it went wrong?
It turned.
It turned.
I think
they could even be Lyft, right, which has a perfectly good reputation.
Yeah, I think. I mean, if you go back to 2014, 15, or whatever, I still think that, nebulously, people kind of thought that Uber was aggressive or maybe the CEO was a jerk or whatever, but there was never a real, you didn't feel guilty using the service, right? Or you didn't have some bad feeling around, well, Uber is a bad company, I'm not really quite sure why, right? And my thesis, and something I get at in the book that you're alluding to, I think, is just sort of this moment of where probably for a very long time tech was on this, tech coverage, the way I think a lot of people in the world viewed it, was on this trajectory of that we're doing this to improve the world. This is, we have good intentions in our hearts. If you sort of appreciate the boy genius hacker in his room building the next billion-dollar company, this will ultimately turn out for the better. And just bear with us, right? And I honestly think 2016, the election was a sort of fracturing point for a lot of the way people think about tech. Right after Donald Trump was elected, there were headlines that said Facebook manipulated the election, right? Or Russia was sort of spreading misinformation throughout social networks, and this is something we hadn't caught on to, or just ways that the tools that we use every day were being manipulated that we hadn't really suspected or thought of. And I think tech, the way we view it, sort of really turned very sharply. And there was probably a version of 2017 where Facebook would have been the ultimate bad guy, right? And that almost happened. That ended up happening in 2018. But I think Uber became this sort of poster child for every bad thing about tech, right? Like a bro-y attitude, this obscene excess and wealth and raising billions of dollars and inability to care about the taxi drivers that they're displacing or that they're just sort of ruining these livelihoods. And I really think that Travis, you can say he built a big world-changing company, and he did, but he also sort of took that entire shift on the chin, and Uber became the poster child for that. So
do you think, minus the tech backlash, that the lax behavior around data or the sexual harassment within the company?
Yeah, that's not to say they weren't innocent.
Well, there is probably, a lot of bad stuff slipped by when people weren't looking, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say that some of it might have gone by, but it does seem like this is clearly, as the book demonstrates, this is a unique character in terms of sort of the combination of drive and amorality.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to put it. I think his Travis Kalanick, the founder and CEO, former CEO, his version of morality was more about the ends rather than the means, I think, and he did have he does have a version of what he believes are the principles he wants to stick by. I just think that they're not widely shared.
Super pumped? Not everybody's super pumped?
Yeah.
Tell us where the title came from.
I should probably tell you what the title means. So Travis, in 2015, there was this, he took everyone in the company to this very large retreat in Las Vegas for hitting a growth milestone. And part of that was just sort of to celebrate, and it ended up being a $25 million party in Las Vegas for more than 10,000, 15,000 employees. They had Beyonce play, which was nice for them. And
I'm just gonna say that I know a person who was at this party, and I got these texts
really?
that I was not supposed to get. She'd be like, "I can't say that much, but Beyonce."
Yeah, it was all out, and I think so. In the middle of this, week-long bacchanal, Travis comes out and does his presentation to employees, where he wants to sort of give a set of values to the company, right? And I think this is very much in the vein of tech sort of. I mean, this is something that I think tech differs from another center of power, say Wall Street. Like they have to sort of form a value system that like guides the company and what they're doing. And sometimes I think, or a lot of the time I think that people like believe that, but I don't always think it. I think it can also be sort of characteristic of what the company is like. And so in that vein, Travis's, some of his values were always be hustling. Super pumped was one of them. Be an owner, not a renter, just sort of, it was like a...
Of like your cubicle? I was never quite sure what that was supposed to mean.
Toe-stepping, meritocracy. It was just very much like Ayn Rand meets Wolf of Wall Street sort of thing. And I mean, that's fine, I mean, it was just very much, this is the type of company that you're working at. And I think some people in the audience were like all in, like they're like, all right, yeah, this is awesome. And then some were like, is this guy kidding?
Were those people the grown-ups? Because I do feel like, and I'm sort of semi-serious here. It does feel like a bit of what happened within Uber is it's one thing if you're, I think we're seeing this now, right? Like the cult of the founder is still very real. You talk a lot about this sort of founder dynamic and that there is a huge aspect of hero worship that goes into a lot of this, that even now people are reluctant to leak from within Facebook because they believe.
Totally.
And I wonder at what point you think Travis lost the crowd.
I think for a lot of the early years, definitely when the company was smaller. I mean, the whole... When a company is really in trouble is when they lose their people and lose their employees, right? Like Facebook had a nightmare 2018, and that was largely because a lot of the leaks that were coming out of there were from people who were like, oh, maybe we're not doing good, or maybe this ethnic cleansing in Myanmar was partially our fault, and that's really a scary thing, right? And so once you shake the faith of the employees, I think your company's really in trouble. And so Uber in 2015, at this point, is a mix of the young, super pumped guys and adults who have like a kid and a mortgage, right? And I think those tended to be the folks who would talk to me a little bit more and like not fully buy into the philosophy and just want to like do their job,
Yeah. Okay, and then let's talk about Bill Gurley, who is a character who looms large throughout this story because he really starts out as somebody who deeply wants to be part of this business model.
Yep.
Which we're going to get to later.
Yep.
This is the venture capitalist, Bill Gurley. Is everybody pretty familiar with Benchmark Capital? So he really becomes this sort of like the best friend, in some way, not as good a friend as Emil Michael, but the friend, the mentor,
right.
The investor, and eventually a little bit like the Judas, Travis Kalanick's worst fear, the guy who basically comes in and takes him down.
Yeah.
Talk about that relationship, because that is highly unusual, right? Like venture capital really, maybe to the detriment of all of us, likes to maintain a hands-off attitude. Like we just give them the money, maybe we have a board seat, but we don't initiate a coup.
Right. So, I'm going to assume we're not spoiling
It's a very exciting book, you guys.
Yeah, it is kind of fun. So, for those who don't know, Bill Gurley is this legendary venture capitalist. He's part of Benchmark, which is a VC firm. They've done big investments in eBay and Nextdoor and Stitch Fix. And so, excuse me. So Gurley, he's this. It's really funny. He's this very tall character. Apparently, someone told me after I wrote this book that I have an obsession with height in my characters.
It does come up.
So you're going to see a lot of height references, and that's. I need to talk to my therapist about that. But
I wore flats.
Gurley. Thank you. Gurley is this figuratively and literally larger than life character. He's like 6'9" or something, but he's looking for, the way VCs work, I think, a lot is they look for a category that they want to be into. And back in 2008 or 9, ride hailing, ride sharing, that sort of like iPhone meets call a car thing is still nascent, but it's like kind of bubbling up. So there's like, if you can even remember what Taxi Magic or Cabulous or a lot of these different companies are around. But VCs, I think, also bet on the person, right? Mm-hmm. And so they met, Gurley and his partner, Matt Kohler, met Travis early on. And, I think they saw this guy, and Travis is a serial entrepreneur at this point. He's done 2 startups. One was a failure. He got sued to oblivion. The other one was like a base hit. And so he wanted like a real startup at this point. And so Benchmark Invest, they're early investors. They get in into series, I want to say A or B. I need to go look. And the whole point of being a VC is you're the mentor, you're supporting your founder, you're founder-friendly. If you're not founder-friendly in the Valley, that's sort of antithetical to how VCs sort of operate, right? So I think that by later in the book, and when the VC and the board members essentially have to like turn on the founder, like turn on the monster that Frankenstein made, or whatever you want to call it, like it becomes even more significant because of Gurley has to put his reputation of being founder-friendly on the line, right? If you betray your CEO, if you sort of remove the person who is the head of your company because you don't think they're going to make it, that stains your rep forever in the Valley, right? And maybe you're not able to make investments in other companies in the future. So I think it really, I don't want to give too much away, but I think it really like heighten the drama of why they were going to do it and why ultimately it ends up so messy and in public, and like it was intense, and I think everyone has like PTSD around the whole thing too. That's kind of a joke, but not, because every time I talk, I've been talking to ex-employees now since the book has come out, and some of my sources are like, I can't even read this, I can't even go back through it again because it just brings up that nightmare year for me.
What I still sort of come back to this because there are lots of founders with lots of issues.
Yeah.
Most of them don't rise all the way to Travis Kalanick level.
Yeah.
But some do. There are real questions about Elon Musk. Like,
sure.
Why? I'm not saying they're from me. I'm just saying they exist. What was the real threat? What is the actual existential threat that Uber goes under?
I think the moment that freaked out everyone. So back in 2017, if you can remember, this was there were a few things I think that happened in really short succession. One, again, I go back to Trump because Trump had just gotten elected. He brings the travel ban down. And that was like the first real action that he took. I think everyone was, at least people in San Francisco were like, is he going to follow through on some of the things that he promised in the run up to office? And so there was a real outsized reaction from folks. People were going to the airports and like lawyers were trying to help out. And so to make a long story short, Uber does this like tweet basically that says we're going to turn off surge pricing in New York when the taxi drivers were like protesting this travel ban. And it was interpreted to mean that Uber was being a bunch of scabs, right? And they were trying to profit off of the taxi strike. And everyone freaks out. And this guy on the internet named Bro Pair who, on Twitter, who it's funny that I have a chapter in my book devoted to this Twitter thing, but this guy starts a movement where he says, we need to delete Uber. We need to, this company represents everything bad about capitalism, about Silicon Valley, about not standing up to, in the face of, injustice. And I think a lot of folks who were sitting there worried about, or sort of wanting to do something, wanting to be a part of whatever, resisting what was going on, could concretely delete their app. They could be like, all right, I'm deleting Uber, I'm going to screenshot this and then put it out into ether, and this was something that I did. And it seemed like a small symbol, but it ended up being 500,000 accounts were deleted within the span of a couple of days. So it started freaking out the VCs when it started harming the business, I would say.
Yeah. So many places to go from there.
Oh, you have a lot of questions.
I do. I know. I have a lot of questions. I'm going to actually, you're right. I'm going to stop thinking and let you guys do the work for a minute. We have two questions that are somewhat along the same lines about your reporting and how you did it. We don't want to get you to give it all away, but there's one that says, it also says, how's Bruna? For those who don't know, Mike has a very famous
Bruna's
Twitter
my dog that I did not bring. But
I'm surprised there's only one of these so far.
I know, right?
So
my dog is doing good. I'm sorry I didn't bring her. She's much more entertaining than I am.
It would have been really distracting.
Yeah. She would have had a panic attack and run out of the room.
Oh, peanut. Oh, I know. Now we're like, see, she's totally distracted. You had to build a lot of trust at a time when really this whole company had this bunker mentality. Maybe not the whole company, clearly, because you did build this sort of network of sources. And it's question, how did you sneak into the Uber all hands meeting? So tell us that, because I think we all need to know that. And then also, how do you cultivate sources in such a sort of dangerous territory?
Yeah. No, I think I was just talking to another reporter about this the other day, and I think everyone just has a different style on sourcing, and I've worked for people who are just super aggressive or I know people who will just call up 5 people and just browbeat them into talking to them. Just tell me what I want to hear. Tell me what I hear. And finally they acquiesce and actually just say whatever they're trying to get. That is not my style. I don't know. I think a lot of it is just sort of being open to what's going on and weirdly, just having a constant dialogue with people online. I've had a lot of inbound over the years from, it's tired, but from my Twitter account, just being myself on there, and I think people can relate if they can feel like they relate to you and talk to you and you say reasonably intelligent things about what's going on, and then it just is a way to get inside. And stories, this is journalism 101, but stories lead to more stories. So once I've been covering Uber since I joined the Times in 2014, so I had some advantage at least. But yeah, I think a lot of it was, and my other thing too is it's easy to just rail against Uber and call them this avatar of gross, excess and nastiness, and I think that there are good people inside that worked and work there, and people that want to do the right thing, and some of the people that I talked to were disturbed by some of the stuff that was happening in there, or they were all right, well, I signed up for this, but I did not want to do that, and so they can recognize that and feel like they're enacting some sort of change, and leaking something to the New York Times usually helps affect change.
Turns out. What did people say was their breaking point? We talked about how Delete Uber was a bit of a breaking point for investors.
I think Susan
what was
Fowler.
The thing? Was it Susan Fowler?
I think it was. So Susan Fowler, I'm sure a lot of people, if you're here, you probably know her, but she's the former employee who wrote a blog post that detailed her history of harassment at the company. Again, this was pre-Harvey Weinstein, Me Too, real momentum towards the end of the year. It was February of 2017. So, and even the Valley hadn't had its full reckoning on how women are treated and how VCs sort of can often be disgusting towards women who are trying to raise money for their companies or whatever. So this was, I think, Susan wrote this post. She just hit publish and just put it out into the ether. And I remember getting 4 or 5 texts from different people saying, "This is blowing up inside. This is going to be a thing, right?" Mm-hmm. And it really just put a voice to a lot of the nastiness or a lot of the unprofessional, childish, whatever, the things that inside of Uber shouldn't happen at a company of that size. And that's when the dam started breaking and everyone just started talking. Not just to me, to a lot of different reporters.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people on this story, so it was very competitive.
I want to talk more about culture in a minute, but I also want to ask about, in Susan Fowler's post, one of the things that was so appalling to read was that over and over, people who were accused and even found to have committed misconduct
Yep.
were not disciplined because they were doing a good job at growth.
Yep.
And that growth in particular, you could argue, is a big difference even between Travis Kalanick and the CEOs of Lyft, or CEO of Lyft, which is growth at all costs, quite literally. And I feel like that post made the cost of that so clear.
Yep.
Do you think there's been like a broader reckoning with the idea of how distorting a forced growth can be? How when that's your metric, I mean, that's arguably the problem at Facebook too.
Totally. No, I think there's this. I mean, I have there's a line in there, or just like grow. You have to grow or die, right? That's what a startup. I mean, and like this is where I try to come in with a sense of empathy around being a founder and being like a small startup. It's like you literally have to get people to use your product, or like your company's dead, right? Or you can't raise that next round, or you can't do the next whatever. But I think that mindset has just been internalized and spread throughout the valley as this like gospel of growth, and that is kind of sort of a blind faith that is abused in a lot of different ways. And I think that played out earlier on in the Facebook days. I think Facebook did a lot of different growth hacking. They call them growth hackers, and now growth hacking is like a skill set, right? There's a lot of different
It's the new SEO.
Weird tricks that you can do to like grow your company, and if normal people knew that you were doing them, maybe they wouldn't like it. I think a lot of it is predicated on information asymmetry and not knowing what these companies are doing. So Uber embodied that, and then also like that's where growth at all costs started to crash into like very real consequences. Like part of the reason why drivers were getting murdered in Brazil was because they didn't apply proper identity checks into signups for riders, right? And so there were moments where the executives were like, well, drivers are getting murdered, but we don't want to slow down our growth. We don't want to add more friction in the process. So we can't change this. So what are we going to do? And finally, there were enough people that are like, dude, people are getting killed. Right. You need to change this, right? So, but
it seems like at every opportunity, even people who were brought in to try to change that mindset, would run up against this just like brick wall of Travis's ambition.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If you hit your numbers, you were golden. And I think that was the sort of unspoken law of being protected. And that's not even specific to Uber. I think that can occur in like a lot of companies that just sort of become corrupted by hitting metrics, getting to that next level of growth or whatever. But I think inside of Uber specifically, it was that was the thing that kept a lot of people safe for probably too long.
Yeah. And granted, you make the really valid point that all of this was happening at the same time, this kind of tech backlash and the idea that, we all sort of knew how much founders were idolized, but we hadn't necessarily connected the dots in terms of how they create a culture that doesn't just impact the people who work there, which is significant, but it impacts the product. That the culture gets built into the product.
Yep.
And that in Uber that had very, like you said, real world consequences. Is this the first time we ever really put that together?
Reckon with that? Well, I think it was made very real, but it's also something that we're interrogating right now with bias and AI, right? Or how the people behind the products that we use and the people making them inform the types of decisions that are made, and what types of things are we like. Basically, if like only young white men in a square patch of California are the ones that are creating things that shape the world, then it's going to be probably a very comfortable world for young white men. But if you're not spreading that DNA of what your company looks like to be more representative of the world that you're serving, then you're gonna just have a very specific outcome. And I think only now we're really starting to ask more of those questions of like, who are we building for and why, and who's doing the building. And I think Some companies are getting better at that. I think they're trying, but it's been I don't think the question has really been that asked for some time.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I guess that leads me to ask, in response to that, like your book is asking those questions. We've sort of like moved on. Like this is all the Uber thing is taken care of, which we'll pick up in a second. But my real question is like, do you think Bill Gurley would make the same decision today, though? Like, do you think that really that much has changed in retrospect?
It's funny. I think about this on my worst days. I'll probably say everyone that was early on Uber is a billionaire. Travis is a billionaire 5 times over. Anyone who invested early is like crazy rich. There's the lockup period on Uber shares is going to expire pretty soon, and there's going to be waves of selling. There's entirely new venture funds being created out of the wealth that was created from Uber. So like, did everyone learn their lesson? Probably not. But at the same time, I do think that. This is going to be cheesy, but like I'll talk to new, first-time, like young, people who want to be engineers or whatever, or like want to start a company or want to start a small business, and say, look, I don't want to do it like that. I don't want to be a nightmare on wheels like Uber was, or have to step down because my culture is just completely disgusting by a certain point, and I want to be more conscious of the company that I'm building from the very beginning. And I think that that's hopeful, at least, or at the very least, like people can demand more out of the products that they use and the companies that they sort of patronize. So that would be the hopeful part of it, but I don't know.
That's a question here, actually, about how we tend to romanticize tech entrepreneurs. Like they're these cowboys, these cowwomen. That's really.
I like that.
None of those terms have aged well, it turns out. And it says, "What are your thoughts on consumer responsibility?" Responsibility.
No, totally.
Now that there are these serious ethical problems, but we were kind of like, I didn't really think about where the driver came from.
Yep. I mean, I think a lot of it is vote with your feet. Like it's really hard to get.
I drove here.
Yeah. Well, see, you're a better person than I am. No,
so I'm just a control freak.
When it comes to convenience versus like ideals, it's really hard to beat convenience. I think for normal people, who are not steeped in this all the time and are stuck in Potrero at like 11 o'clock at night and need to get home, like maybe it's easier to press a button or whatever. I do think that the conversation is being had more right now. Like the way that people look at Facebook right now is kind of indicative of that mindset shifting. There are people who won't use it on principle, or there are folks who refuse to go there because they think it's not a positive force in the world. And that was crazy like 3 or 4 years ago. I remember people would kill to get into Facebook. It was Facebook and Google, really, and now they're having this sort of reckoning. So I do think at least the question is there, but at the end of the day, it really is about what people are willing to give up. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. Since
the book was published, Uber's public now.
Yeah.
They've had a round of layoffs of over 400 people.
Yeah, it was today.
Today, and there's a question here that says, what does this mean for the future of Uber or its competitors? And in some ways, the chapters are ongoing because now it seems like there are, at long last, some real questions about the business.
The business model.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the world is really different from when Travis started this company from where it is now. Back then, I get into it in the book, but there's this. He was unbelievable at raising money. Like this company raised more than $10 billion in private capital. There were mutual funds were starting to like throw in cash. Like everywhere you could start raising money, he found money and just poured it in to their war chest, and didn't have that much competition. And I would say he said our money is our moat. What a moat being our competitive advantage, so the thing that's going to keep anyone from usurping our power. Cut to like 5-7 years later, and now you can like money is much more free flowing in a lot of different markets. SoftBank entered the room with its Vision Fund, $100 billion monster waiting to like park cash in any sort of competitor. So whereas once Uber was fighting maybe 1 or 2 competitors, now it's fighting competitors across multiple continents and burning tons of money doing that. And so the Uber, I just felt like there was a moment where Uber felt like an inevitability, and it doesn't feel like that anymore. You know, it feels like their business might not be as sound as they thought it was, and now they're trying to get to a point where they can move into other lines of business, and that turns out to be very difficult too.
And I actually heard, and I am concerned that this could be the start of the redemption tale. I heard an interview that suggested that maybe under Dara Khosrowshahi, Uber's gotten a little boring. Maybe they need a guy like Travis.
Wow.
And actually, my friend who worked at Uber said, you know, listen, you're kidding yourself if you think that Travis is going to go gently into that dark night and that he's going to start some other thing that he cares about just as much. I mean, how much do you think he's just sitting at home plotting his return, Steve Jobs style? I mean, is that part of, that's part of Valley lore?
That would...
Would you write another book?
A good story.
Not to be mercenary.
No, I was. That's the other insane thing about writing a book is like the story is constantly happening and you don't know when you.
That's this question. Like, what's happened since that you wish was in there? Yeah. Okay, let's explore this idea first, though.
Yeah. No, I think so. Travis is working on this thing now called Cloud Kitchens.
He doesn't care about that.
And he does, no. Well, that's the thing. It is still like symbiotically attached to Uber because it's based on food delivery, and Uber Eats is one huge arm of growth for Uber in the future. So people at Uber are still kind of like nervous that he has like one thing still attached to Uber. It's so funny. It's so funny how quickly we forget the trauma of 2017, and but there are a lot of people inside who still admire him. There are a lot of people outside who still admire him. He instilled faith in a lot of different people. So maybe they're bored of Silicon Valley's dad. That's what a lot of people called Dara. Like
Silicon Valley's dad.
Yeah, it was like the dad of Silicon Valley. Yeah. It's very warm, but I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, I think the people at the top are just so shaken that it would be very hard for me to see Travis coming back.
I mean, look, money talks, though. If you had to lay odds.
Yeah, I don't. I wouldn't bet. I'm abstaining from that bet.
Is Travis also just one last question about that sort of that personality type? But like we're at a point in America where there does seem to be a currency in not saying sorry, in Travis's style.
Yeah, totally.
Like I think we have to look no further than the White House to look at people who double, triple, quadruple down on the choices that they're making. Period.
Yep. No, I mean a lot of people.
Like, is he just the founder of our time?
Right. I think a lot of folks who I was talking to when I was going back for this book too, just kind of said he had their point was he had a Trumpian quality about creating this reality, right? This was the way forward. This was, unapologetically how we're going to do it. And that was attractive to a lot of people inside, and if you are the guy who's just sort of charging hard and seem to know where your direction is, at least you can get a bunch of different followers that way. So maybe he is more emblematic than Dara.
Yeah. Now he's not in this book. Did you?
Dara?
No. I mean, Travis is obviously all over this book. Did you talk to him in the course of writing this? Have you talked to him? Have you heard from him?
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
Do you wish you could have?
Sure, but I think also it's harder to write an oppositional book, like just sort of like the moment you get cooperation from a primary source, it just colors it, you know, like, and so I had to like work around it, and you know, we gave them an opportunity for fact checking or whatever, but like, it almost made it. I mean, I say, it almost made it better, I think, because I didn't get my hand held throughout the whole thing, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know?
There's a question here that is hard to speak to from that perspective, but I wonder how your sources viewed it. One of the really intense and jarring moments in the book is Travis Kalanick being confronted with video of himself confronting a driver
Yep.
about their low pay, and just like writhing on the floor, saying, "I'm a terrible person. I'm a terrible person. Like, what's wrong with me?"
Yeah.
Did the people that you talked to, and is it your opinion that was sincere, that it's a manipulation, that it's just like too much going on there?
No, totally. I think it's so funny. Even people now who like him or admire him or support him or whatever still have very mixed feelings about him, just because he's very charming. He's been able to win people over. You know, even the last time. You know, there is a moment in the book that I write about that I see him, and it was in court for this trial, Waymo versus Uber, and he's just immediately charming. It's very disarming. It's not good for me being a reporter where I'm just like, oh, I want to like this person, you know. Mm-hmm. But anyone who's like attached to him in some way also has mixed feelings about him and wonder. You know, I talked to one person who was like, did I just believe what I wanted to believe about him all along? Because I found out he was lying to me in these other ways, you know? And he probably had a rationale for that, and that's his thing or whatever, but I just know that a lot of folks around him have a very complicated thing. So even the people who are close to him or have been close to him have a hard time pinning down what was real or not.
What does it tell you about, you know, we're talking about founder control. We're talking about things like dual class structure, which you know, gives all of this power to founders, which we're really took all the way.
Yep.
But which Facebook has also done, which Google, you know, had an unusual stock structure. Do you see, as you continue to report in the Valley, any signs that, because, you know, it's interesting, like during the dot-com boom, there was, like, the founder culture we have now is a little bit of a response to the dot-com bust in 2001, which was like, back then, everybody said, you know, a founder can only take a company so far, and then we have to bring in a grown-up. And they took away all their power.
Eric Schmidt comes in and does this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then we have this, you know, now we've swung, some would argue, too far the other way.
Yeah.
Do you see signs of us swinging back toward grown-up?
No, I think it's really a pendulum. Someone was talking to me about this online today. Most of my life exists online, which is really sad. But I think.
But there's a dog.
There is a dog. Yeah. No, I think it's a pendulum. I think a lot of this sort of moves back and forth based on like really intense extremes, right? If at one point Zuckerberg was the platonic ideal of this founder who could grow this amazing company and like build this world-changing thing, then perhaps Travis was like the inverse of that, like give all the control to someone at the top with dual stock structure. It's complicated, but it's in the book. It's just sort of like a way of giving the founder control, outsized control. And he built all those protections into the company he did. And that's why it took such drastic measures to remove him from the company. Mm-hmm. And so I still think we're in a phase where founders have more leverage than VCs, just because there's more money to go around right now than there has been in a long time. But perhaps it will swing back the other way. You know, I think a lot changed since the dot-com era, where founders were begging for money, and now all sorts of new money is flooding into the zone, and I think the founders have the high road here.
Doesn't that kind of suggest that not that much is going to change?
No, that's the real cynical part.
It's still like 90% of VCs are white guys. Like,
right.
Is anything changing?
I don't know.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know. I mean, no. I think. Look, maybe people will buy my book. maybe.
And go like.
Maybe. I do think. I have. In all seriousness, I have met a lot of folks who ex-Uber were just sort of like washed their hands of it, or wanted to be like, man, this was just not for me, or I hope the Valley doesn't have to be like this, or I want to build the next company that's not like this. And I think there are people who are very consciously doing that. And the other thing I think about a lot is like, tech is not going away, right? Like we're not just going to sort of go into full Luddism and eliminate all of this stuff. And just because we're in an age of tech ruling the world, and we're realizing how important yet dangerous it can be, it doesn't mean we're going to get rid of it all. I think now we're in a period of finding out how we're comfortable with living in it and what we expect of the companies and the products that are around us. And I think that that's a good natural progression. You know?
Yeah. Actually, along those lines, we have some questions about the broader tech industry, including after what we've seen unfold with Uber and Facebook. What are your thoughts on Google and this current wave of proposed regulation, the antitrust regulation that you wrote about in the Times this week?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the part of the reckoning that. So I would argue that regulators have largely been asleep at the wheel for a very long period of time. I think if we were to go back and have an FTC that was scrutinizing deals in a more intense way, it probably would have been hard to see the WhatsApp deal with Facebook go through, or the Instagram deal, or Google's corner on advertising technology, or the number of mapping companies it owns. Like, there's just a lot of decisions that in retrospect seem like kind of obvious now, that like, oh, these companies are incredibly powerful, but they also kind of just let it happen, right? So this is not me advocating for one way or the other, but it's just sort of regulators are now looking back and saying, okay, well, maybe there's ways when we could act, or maybe we have different recourse, or the FTC is now like looking more deeply into not just Facebook, a number of companies, and so is the Department of Justice. So there's some action there, but also like it's hard to tell how real that is, or if it's like sort of theater to make it look like they're smacking the companies. But I mean, the FTC fine of $5 billion for Facebook, $5 billion is like a rounding error, right? So like it's hard for me to determine whether this stuff is going to be a lasting impact or not.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of what this reckoning is about is unintended consequences.
Yeah.
But when you read, for example, your book, you start to feel like there's a sense that the regulators aren't going to be able to catch up because, I think I compared Mark Zuckerberg before Congress as like the T-1000 Terminator to, the old Arnold Schwarzenegger T-800 model.
Yeah.
And which is super nerdy. But there's this sense that they were running circles around him. And when you read your book and you talk about some of the tactics that Uber employed, like Uber foresaw that regulators were going to try to shut them down, and in fact employed ex-spies and came up with these like incredibly complicated programs by spying on regulators and tricking them into thinking that they were calling cars that never came. I mean, like, again, super exciting. So I'm not trying to feed the mythology, but like how far behind are we when it comes to consequences that on some level maybe these companies are foreseeing?
I think you're totally right. I think that there are, a lot of it. I mean, Uber, just in the case of Uber, they had so many different advantages on how they attacked the city, right? Like, you can't enforce. There's a line that some guy has in there. The law is not what is written, it's what is enforced, right? And they couldn't stop people from doing the service, right? And then their whole plan was to hit a tipping point where people loved it so much that they would be upset if it went away. So I think it's hard to, when tech is outpacing existing laws, much less like enforcing any of those, like how is that going to be reined back in? And it's hard, it's really hard to see that without some sort of like self-curbing mechanism, or at least like the companies themselves. I mean, like to be hopeful or something, some of the companies are saying, we invite regulation, we welcome like some of these guidelines, which is partially disingenuous, but I think that they're probably like, okay, well, let's tamp down ourselves before they do it for us. You know? It's hard. It's hard to sort of put what metaphor do I want to use? Put this stuff back in the box.
Yeah.
I'm a terrible writer.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Stuff back in the box. Gotcha. That made me laugh so much that I forgot my question. Let's actually, though, this idea of unintended consequences does remind me of something that this same Uber friend said, which was that. So one of the things I think that these companies have told themselves, have told us, have told their employees is that they're doing a good thing.
Yep.
And it's easy to forget that the people who work for Uber saw it as a mission-driven company.
Yep.
To, take cars off the road and make the planet better and remove traffic when it's, it's now been found to do just the opposite.
Right.
What does that tell you about the way that, the way that companies view themselves or the stories we tell ourselves and how it allows things to spiral?
I think it's kind of split. I think there are a lot of people who do believe that they're doing good in the world, and I think that sometimes they've walked into things where they had the best intentions, and it still turns out like something horrible can happen as a result of this. I feel like we're in an era of like recognizing the unintended consequences and like being like, oh my God, how do I deal with this? Like that's like a sort of awakening for folks in the industry. And then I think they're the ones who are probably a little more cynical and are in it because the opportunity is what it is, or just like realistically, like, look, I have a family, I need to do this or whatever, and like, sure, we have all these goals and stuff, but I think both of those kind of exist. One thing I do think happens though is like maybe early on the idealism is very much there, and then I think once you're in a place of power, it's really hard to give up that power, right? Like I think every company here that gets to the top just wants to stay at the top. And like ask Zuckerberg if he's willing to cede share to Snapchat when it came up. No, instead you clone it and murder it, right? Like that's like it's no one wants to lose what they already have. And I think that even in the interest of whatever, in the better good of how people live and operate or the interest of fairness or whatever, I think once you get to the top, it's hard to like step down from that.
Yeah.
No matter how idealistic you are.
And kind of given that and the ideals, I can't believe I'm going to ask you this because there's a lot of really bad stuff in that book. We didn't even get to the safe rides fee.
Oh, yeah.
But was there any part of the Uber story that you thought was a little unfair? Like, was there any point at which you thought to yourself, compared to other founders who are also not innocent,
Yep.
Was Travis persecuted at all?
Yeah, no, okay.
What's wrong with me? I just need to know.
No, I absolutely think that it's really funny. There's like a meme that happens whenever we uncover the royal we of uncovering something that's unsavory in the Valley, right? There was an email tracking program that people dug up the other day, and it made a lot of people mad. And they're like, oh, this is weird. Like, you're spying on whether I open your email or not. I'm not cool with this, I don't like it. And there was a big little backlash. And then another wing of folks came out
Please
and
call your
said,
next book
Big Little Backlash. No, that's my
Amazing.
TV series starring Nicole Kidman. No, and
As Marissa Meyer.
No, right, right. But then there are the folks that come in and say, this is well established. There are companies doing much worse than this. Why are you freaking out about this little thing? And I kind of hate that reasoning. It's just sort of, it kind of says that the past is done with and we are already way ahead of that. Like, you can't sort of voice what you're not comfortable with because there are things happening that are way worse. And I don't think that's true at all. I think people can decide what they're comfortable with or not comfortable with, and as we sort of understand more about the way things work around us, then that that verdict can come as it will. I will say that, like, look, I think Uber had done some things that I think Lyft and Uber kind of were doing similar things. I think Lyft probably gets a better reputation than it should, but that's only because it has Uber as a foil. And Uber, like, to be fair to Lyft, like Uber, like whatever Lyft would do, Uber would just like jack it up that little bit more and make it a little bit more gross and take it and be like the poster child for badness, you know. But I think Lyft probably got a lot of cover because of that.
Yeah. Tell us more about that, because I think there is a question as we explore the boundaries of our backlash about, you know, whether some of these companies, even that have a good Airbnb, for example, is a company that I think you can reasonably ask, like, is this a net benefit?
Right.
So tell us more about what you found out about Lyft in, you know, this research, and then how does that compare? What is the relative badness here?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, how comfortable are you with, you know, I guess it's just sort of a question of what are you willing to give up or not give up, right? Or what degree of badness do you want to do in using these services? I think Lyft has some of the similar questions, right? How do they treat their drivers? And like, are there safety issues? I mean, there was a class action lawsuit the other day about sexual assaults of women Lyft drivers. I think they were either drivers or riders, I can't remember. But like, they have very similar problems that Uber does, though Uber more often gets tagged with them. And Lyft had said for some time they're going to improve safety, and they haven't done that yet. So there are, I think there are just some things about, by virtue of being the biggest in the room, and by Uber's sort of brand baggage, they have just like issues. But I think it's fully fair to point out what, you know, I think they all just sort of have the same questions around worker protections and labor too. That's one thing I didn't get too deep into in my book, just because I feel like there are a few other writers that have done entire books on what has happened to labor as a result of the gig economy. And some people would argue, you know, there's a bill in Congress, or in the California Congress right now, called AB 5, I believe, that's probably going to pass, but it's you know, talking about turning these workers into employees. Uber is trying to push back. Uber and other companies are trying to push back with a hybrid version of like half employee, half worker sort of thing. So. And some folks are arguing that they have set back a lot of hard-fought protections pretty far. So I think it's probably easy to pin a lot on Uber, and they have done some really messed up stuff internally, like specific to them. But I think the class of companies unlock a whole series of questions on what are we comfortable with and the things that we use every day.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was going to ask you actually about the worker factor and how you think when we look back in 10 or 15 years, we'll say, because, you know, unquestionably, these companies did create an entire category of labor, an entire category of, I mean, almost as disruptive as the App Store, right? The idea that these vehicles on the road have also enabled all of this delivery. They've created, you know, opportunities for freight. Uber is in all these other businesses. And I wonder how you like see that legacy in 15 years. Are we going to go, wow, they were kind of jerks, but that was pretty foundational.
Right. Well, no. Okay. So I was on, I was on a radio show today, and there were people calling in, there were drivers calling in, right? And we were talking about this bill, AB 5, and there were probably just as many people saying, I don't want this bill. It's going to make me an employee. I don't want to be an employee. I set my own sort of schedule. I don't have to, like when I was at Starbucks, I had to clock in at X and clock out at Y, and I don't want to do that, right? I'm sort of like my own person, or I'm just doing this until I get my next job, and I want to, like if I become an employee, I don't want to do that, you know, that's not, and I think I think it just depends on who's, you know, sort of, like everyone has like a very different perspective on this, and some folks really believe that this is the overall net result is very damaging to worker protections. And some people really buy into Uber's sort of point where you can say, like, look, I'm my own boss right now, and I can provide my own schedule. So I think there's like absolutely a counter argument. I think what we end up with is something in the middle. I think Uber and these other companies have pushed for this hybrid classification where it's like half protections or some concessions, but not like a full protections of a worker, of a normal employee. So I'm guessing that's what's here to stay.
Yep. We have now reached the point in the program where there's only one question left,
Oh, God.
which I'm going to give to the audience because this is perfect. What has happened? What, if anything, has taken place since you published the book that you wished you'd gotten in there?
Oh man. Okay. Yeah. It was like a week. It was the week before publication, and I get a call on like a Monday or something from someone saying you need to be down in San Jose tomorrow at 8:00 in the morning or whatever. I was like, okay, what is going on? And it turns out we didn't get into this, but the main self-driving car engineer at Uber, Anthony Lewandowski, was indicted by the Department of Justice on 33 counts of theft of trade secrets and attempted theft of trade secrets. And I detail that in the book, and I detail this sort of overarching battle, but it was still a question mark on whether this guy was going to get comeuppance or whatever. And now he's innocent until proven guilty, but he's facing a hard time, and the government is going after him. So missed that by a week. I wish I could have been there, but I wrote a story on it at least.
At least you got the book done.
At least, thank God.
Thanks to Mike Isaac, tech reporter for the New York Times. He is the author of the new book, Super Pumped. Super Pumped. We do like a chant, I think.
Super Pumped?
Super Pumped. The battle for Uber. We want to remind you here that copies of Super Pumped are available for purchase. Mike will be happy to sign your book right after he signs mine outside the room in just a minute. I'm Molly Wood on behalf of myself, Mike, and the Commonwealth Club. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.